Warning. What do we know about the new House Speaker Mike Johnson? Republican Mike Johnson of Louisiana is the new Speaker of the House. On Tuesday night, the House GOP caucus emerged from a room and immediately humiliated themselves with their giddiness and excitement over having a nominee with whom they could all unite as if they just united quantum mechanics and general relativity in a grand unified theory. They discovered Mike Johnson, the quiet ultra-MAGA that you've never heard of, and that seems important. They managed to waste 3 weeks that we'll never get back on a process that takes most caucuses 2 to 3 hours. You have never heard of Mike Johnson because he's a real human being who isn't in Washington to get his face in front of a camera. He is there to do the people's work. The problem is that Mike Johnson's idea of the people's work is to work against most people on behalf of the Trump agenda. That Trump endorses Johnson is all you really need to know. Trump likes Mike Johnson because he's a thinking man's election denier. Last year, the New York Times cited him as the architect of decertification of the 2020 election in the House of Representatives, where 139 members voted against certification. And they did it all based on Johnson appointing himself as a one-man Supreme Court in about 6 states and the United States Supreme Court. According to the Times report, time equals 400 Ms. greater than, on the eve of the January 6 votes, he presented colleagues with what he called a third option. He faulted the way some states had changed voting procedures during the pandemic, saying it was unconstitutional, without supporting the outlandish claims of Mr. Trump's most vocal supporters. His Republican critics called it a Trojan horse that allowed lawmakers to vote with the president while hiding behind a more defensible case. The MAGA is strong in this man. He had been in Congress just 4 years when he decided that the best way to throw out a presidential election was to determine, on his own, that the state's elections were unconstitutional, a breathlessly arrogant and dangerous argument. He also circulated an email signing off on the Texas lawsuit to the Supreme Court trying to overturn the 2020 election. Remember that point in January of 2025 if this man is still Speaker of the House, not a certainty. With the political turmoil and shaky alliances amongst Republicans. Because in the United States, judges and courts decide what is and is not constitutional. Not Congress and certainly not one member of Congress. See Marbury versus Madison, 1803. Okay, so that was then. What about now? What is this Johnson guy like? Well, he got off to a horrible start by sounding like an overly caffeinated 13-year-old with short-term memory loss. An NBC News report quotes Johnson as saying in a raucous environment, "This House Republican majority is united. We're going to serve the people of this country. We're going to restore their faith in Congress, this institution of government. America is the last, best hope of man on earth." Abraham Lincoln said it. Ronald Reagan used to remind us all the time, and we're here to remind you of that again. I'll have whatever that guy's drinking. Time equals 400 Ms. greater than. This group here is ready to govern and we're going to govern well. You're going to see this group looking to work like a well-oiled machine. We owe that to the American people. Cancel that order. This guy is living in complete denial and isn't smart enough to downplay expectations and then hope to exceed them. Time equals 400 Ms. greater than now. Johnson has the most thankless job on earth. Forget opposing the thoughtful Democrats. He has to oversee a group of vandals that want to break shit, not govern. Does he support aid for Ukraine? We don't know. How far is he willing to go with Social Security? We don't know. Time equals 400 Ms. greater than. Here is what we do know. The hapless GOP took a man who just 7 years ago was a member of the Louisiana State House and a lawyer, and in the 7 years since has done nothing noteworthy enough to report other than be a nice guy who wants to overturn the votes of the majority of Americans, and named him their leader. In a week, Johnson will be sitting in the Roosevelt Room at the White House with Senator Schumer, Senator McConnell, Representative Jeffries, and President Biden. With over 100 years of experience spread among them, In that meeting, Johnson is going to have to emerge with a deal that is acceptable to the other parties, won't get him removed from the speakership on his return, and which the majority of his members will vote for. He can campaign on gutting Social Security and Medicare, and all that's MAGA and America first. But we won't know Mike Johnson until we know if he's willing to shut the government down or work with the president and the Senate while delivering his caucus. Just remember two things. 1. The well-oiled machine comment. And 2, most importantly, he appointed himself to be the Supreme Court to turn over an election on Trump's behalf. This isn't good news. I can be reached at jasonmichiak@gmail.com and on X at jasonmichiak. Editor's note. This is an opinion column that solely reflects the opinions of the author. Jason Michiak. Jason Michiak is an associate editor and opinion writer for Occupy Democrats. He's a Canadian-American who grew up in the Pacific Northwest. He is a trained attorney, but for the last 5 years, he's devoted his time to writing political news and analysis. He enjoys life on the Gulf Coast as a single dad to a 15-year-old daughter. Hobbies include flower pots, cooking, and doing what his daughter tells him they're doing. Sign up to get all of my posts by email right here. Latest posts.